Okay, so today we're going to talk about wastage. And wastage, as it says at the top of the page, is the process of cutting away materials with tools and equipment. So you are removing something from the piece of material that you had. So when you finished it, it's no longer there. Okay, and that can be through cutting, it can be through sanding bits away from it and shaping it. It can also be using a drill, which will drill a hole in it. So what you need to remember is it is removing some of that material that you started with. Okay, so firstly we'll have a look at saws, and they're pretty much the usual thing that you would use to remove material when you were cutting. We've got two saws today. Alright, so we've got one which would suit long straight cuts on thicker pieces of timber, and then another one which would be better for thinner timber, thinner pieces of wood, and it would be better for cutting curves and complex sort of fiddly shapes. Okay, so first of all we're going to look at the tenon saw. Now the tenon saw, which is this one here, it is basically one of the most used saws, and it's for cutting straight lines with good accuracy. Now the reason why it has an accurate cut is if you look at it, you can see here the blade and the panel here is a lot wider than the saw at the bottom, and basically that helps to keep the saw straight. So when you're cutting, it's not wobbling around and it's not sort of moving as much because it's got a thicker blade and panel on it. Now the top part, where it says here brass back, that's a strengthening panel, and that also encourages the saw to keep at the angle that you're cutting at, keeps the cut really straight. And these are, you know, great for doing any kind of accurate cutting. If you're doing joints where things have to be cut accurately and then they fit within another shape, these are the saw to go to. Okay, coping saws. Now your coping saw is this one at the bottom, and that one is usually used for cutting through thinner timber, and it's really good for cutting curves too. And as you can see from this one, there's a lot more going on with this, and I'm just going to explain to you what some of these things are. Alright, so if you look at the blade for a start, you can see how thin it is. Okay, it's nowhere near the thickness of the tenon saw, and that's why that is used primarily for curves and being able to nibble away little bits of intricate patterns, because it's so thin. It's easy to turn in different directions. It's also got a removable handle, which when you unscrew it, the blade will fall out. Now one of the reasons that you would do that is if you were cutting a shape, like if you're doing lettering and you're cutting an O, you want to cut the middle out, you would drill a hole first, so you've got somewhere to put the saw blade. You put the saw blade through, you'd feed it through, and then you would attach the handle back up again. And what that means is you can cut inside shapes as well, not just for cutting outside. Okay, so there is something else that we need to talk about with regards to saws, and that is TPI. So TPI basically means teeth per inch, and it's a common measurement for saws, and the general rule is the more teeth per inch, the neater the cut finish will be, but generally the saw will be slower. Okay, it will cut slower. Fewer teeth equals fast cut, but it's a rough cut. So if in the workshop, if you look at the tenon saws, there's two different ones in the cupboard. You've got blue and black handled one, which has got less teeth per inch. And they look slightly bigger. You can see they look like they're sharper, but they're just bigger, and they will rip through. They'll cut through a lot quicker than the blue and yellow handled ones, which almost look like the blade has been worn down. It hasn't. It's just they've got more teeth per inch. So if you were cutting something and you wanted a smooth finish, that you wanted it to be reasonably neat, you would use the one that has the most teeth per inch. Okay, your coping saw, now they tend to have quite a high TPI because they're used on things like plywood, and plywood is really it's a lead piece of timber, and when you cut through it, you're cutting through different layers which are set in different directions. So you get a lot of splintering and a lot of bits flying off. And if you use something that had less TPI, it would just shred it, which is rip it to pieces. So using more TPI means that you're going to get that nicer cut. It doesn't disturb the layers on the plywood as much as it would if you'd use less TPI. But then you get a slower, preciser cut with it and a neat finish. So those are the two different reasons why we have TPI. Okay. Right, so the next thing that we're going to look at, other methods of wastage. Remember, wastage is the removal and the cutting away of excess timber or whatever material that you're using. So drilling. Okay, so drilling is basically you will be drilling a hole through something, and in the workshop we'll generally use either a cordless hand drill or a pillar drill, depending on the size or the amount of drilling that you need to do or the accuracy that you need. Okay, so both of these are used to produce round holes in timber, and using different drill bits will give you a different outcome. Okay, some will cut through as a hole, will take a whole piece out, others will drill small holes through. Depends what you want. Okay, so that is still a method of wastage because you are removing something that was there. Right. Chiseling. So again, I mean, chisels are used to cut and to shape timber, and they do it with slicing off very thin pieces at a time. You don't cut out a chunk of it, you take a little bit off at a time and you wear it away little bit by little bit. And you've got three chisels that we generally use. Okay, so you've got a firmer chisel, and that's something which you can use with a mallet. You can tap it and gently take out pieces of timber and shape that way. You've got your beveled edge chisel, which is good for angles, and again, small amounts. Now your mortise chisel, again, that can take a few knocks with a mallet, but that's slightly different. That's used to help you cut out accurate holes out of solid pieces of timber. For instance, if you were making a joint, you would need to use a mortise chisel to make the hole in which the other piece of timber was going to fit into. Okay, so finally we've got sanding. Now again, sanding, it's not as dramatic as cutting or chiseling away, but it is still the same thing. You are still losing something that you started off with, still taking bits away. And again, in the workshop we have a disc sander, we have belt sanders, and basically they will smooth and shape your timber quite quickly. All right, and they usually have a wheel or a belt with an abrasive paper that spins and removes the wood. All right, now you will be using one of those, but also, when you look at sanding, you can look at glass paper. That is a rough paper which will smooth and finish off your work in just the same way, but it's hand done rather than electrical. So I've popped a few pieces on for you to have a look at on Google, or I think they're on YouTube, and they're just little films or animations about each of those: drilling, chiseling, sanding. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to have a look through them and use this PowerPoint and what you find there to do just an A4 sheet about wastage. I want you to put down as much information as you can of what it is, what you use, and why you use it. Okay, so if you choose to write about a tenon saw, you need to say what a tenon saw does, why you would use it as opposed to a coping saw. So I want you to go through the tools that we've talked about and in your own words describe what they would be used for. But use the links on this side here because they're quite helpful. Technology students are a really good resource to go into if you're ever looking for anything about technology. You just type it in and they usually have something in there for you. But those ones will take you straight to it. And that is it for today. Thank you very much.